So yesterday we did the installation, right? After installation, so we are involved in the queue manager and its objects. Queue manager and its objects configuration. So we already discussed. So for creation of the queue manager and its objects, we are using WebSphere MQ commands, right? Control commands as well as MKSA scripting commands. So the first one is the queue manager creation. The first one is the queue manager. So once we install the MQ server, so we have to create the queue manager object. Queue manager is the one, so which is responsible for providing messaging and queuing functionality. Queue manager is the one which is responsible for providing messaging and queuing functionality. Okay, so here, okay, so while creation of the queue manager, what IBM is suggesting, follow the naming convention. Following the, you have to follow the naming convention. Okay, so what are the naming convention? What are the naming convention we have to follow? What are the naming convention we have to follow? For queue manager objects and queue manager and its objects creation, so we have to follow the naming convention. Following naming convention is also a best practice. Following naming convention is also a best practice. So the name should be always uppercase. Always the name should be always uppercase and short name. So why short name is, for queue manager and its objects. For queue manager and its objects, we can give up to 48 char length. We can give up to 48 char length. Name of the queue manager or its objects, we have an option to give up to 48 char length. For only channel 20 char. For only channel it is into the 20 char. So if we are given 48 char length of the name, so it is a very difficult, right? So that is the reason what IBM is suggesting, always, okay, give the name should be uppercase and short name, and it should be application specific. It should be application specific. Okay, so following naming convention is the best, is also a best practice. IBM is suggesting always use uppercase, short name, and application specific. These are the naming convention we have to follow. So once we install the MQ server, first we have to create queue manager object. Why? Because in MQ, the basic functionality of the MQ is, okay, providing messaging and queuing functionality. So here what happens exactly is, okay, so source application, for example, this is, I have source application, this is source application, this is the target application. So what will happen is, here this is the queue manager, this is the queue here. Okay, so I have one more queue here. Okay, so here what happens exactly, so The source application first establish a communication to the queue manager, then writing message and disconnected. That's it. Then target application establish a communication to the queue manager. So again it is reading message. Then again it is sending it to the queue. From here it is reading. Okay. So in the messaging and queuing, what happens exactly? Messaging means a program to program communication between the diversified applications. So one program will write establishing connection communication to the queue manager, and it is writing message in the queue. And another program will establish a communication to the queue manager, it is reading message from the queue. This is what happens. So that is the reason, the first thing, so here we have to create the queue manager object. So for creation of the queue manager object, for
Nagin,
starting,
hi, Vikrant here.
yes,
Hello.
for
I think there's a question. Can you go back to the slide where you made the picture? Yeah. So here in target application, would it make would it make another queue, Nagin? For example, the source application made a connection to the queue manager and wrote the message in a queue. Yes, this one. And the target is coming back and writing, reading the queue and writing something to another queue because there are two boxes inside a
yes,
bigger
yes,
box.
another queue. We can have, so this same thing I explained you in the last session also, planning and installation session also. We can use
Okay.
for these two same queue also, but in segregation we are using two different queues. Okay.
Okay.
Have you listened in my first session, planning and installation?
Mm, I
So in
think
there
so.
also I explained. In a segregation is very important in an organization. That is the reason for request we are using one queue, for response we are using another queue. Okay.
But isn't that overhead? Isn't that an overhead? Unnecessary.
Necessary. Segregation is very important. Okay.
No,
So
this
in
is
it,
important, but sorry,
in,
but my question is, isn't it an overhead in the sense we are creating two queue because mainframe is so much costly. So can't we use should we use just one queue instead of creating two segregations?
no, no. See, two queues are, it is a best practice. If you are using one queue, if any issue, so request and response messages both are in the same queue. Okay. So the best option always requesting one queue and responding we are using another queue. Okay. If we are using local queuing,
Okay.
so we have this option. We can use either one queue or two queues. Always for request and response we are using two different queues is the best mechanism. Okay.
Okay.
Two different queues is the, for segregation is very important. So queue is the only storage place. So using two different queues is the best option. Okay, for request and response. Okay. So okay, in local, for CRT MQM is the queue manager for, and so for creation of the queue manager and its objects, so we have to use the, we are using the for creation. So basically this command comes under the control commands. So CRT MQM I am given ABC. CRT MQM I am given the ABC. Okay. So here ABC is the my queue manager name, it will create. But while creation of the queue manager, so we have various options. While creation of the queue manager, so we have various options are there. So what are those options? What are those options? While creation of the queue manager, so we have various options are there. What are those options? So as a administrator, so we have to come to know what are the options are available. So while creation of the queue manager. Okay. Simply for example, if I am given a command like this, if I am given CRT for example login, so it will create a queue manager. Okay. So what are these options? So while creation of the queue manager, CRT is the command hyphen a, allow this group access to queue manager files. Allow this allow this group access allow this group access to queue manager files. Means for example, I am given a Nagin. So Nagin is the group. So this group users can access the queue manager files, but this is not widely using. So why? Because by default, MQM group user can access the only MQM group user can access the WebSphere MQ queue manager configuration files. So if you want to any other group, so we have to give the -a and the name of the group. So -c is the text description for which application. For example, I am mentioning some ABC application names. So whenever we display the queue manager attributes, so we can check in the description of the queue manager. Okay, these are the applications are using. Okay, to identify which applications are using. This is a text description. The most important -a, it is allowing the group access. -g, okay, it is restrict the use of queue manager to this group. So here -a is allowing, here -g is restricting. So the most important is -lc and -ll. Okay. So -lc is circular logging, -ll is the linear logging. WebSphere MQ support two types of logging mechanism. One is the circular logging and the second one is the linear logging. One is the circular logging mechanism and another one is the linear logging mechanism. Okay. For example, I am given a CRT MQM and queue manager name. Here my queue manager name is the Nagin. So I am going to create a queue manager name is the Nagin. So I am using control command CRT MQM. So I am given the queue manager name, but I haven't mentioned any logging option here. So by default, so there are two logging mechanisms it will support WebSphere MQ. One is the circular logging, another one is the linear logging. Okay. So while creation of the queue manager, if we haven't mentioned any logging mechanism, so by default it will take the circular logging. Circular logging is the default logging mechanism. Okay. So if I want to create the queue manager using linear logging mechanism, okay, so while creation of the queue manager, okay, -ll we have to mention. Okay. So if I want to create a queue manager using linear logging mechanism, okay, so we have to mention -ll. There is a difference between the circular logging and linear logging. We have one exercise. We have one exercise difference for the circular logging as well as linear logging. The simple difference is circular logging is a ring-like structure. Circular logging is a ring-like structure. Okay. For example, if we have three log files, if we have three log files, if the first one has been filled, then it will be written in the second. The second file has been filled, then it will be written in the third file. Then it will rewrite the old log files. Means it comes into the first and it will rewrite the old log files. That is the circular logging. Okay. In if you will go for the linear logging, it is continuously writing. If the third log file also has been filled, if we don't have any space, what we have to do? We have to manually clean up the log files. Okay, it is continuously writing. It won't rewrite the whole log files. There is a advantage for the linear logging mechanism. The advantage is if any objects has been damaged in the runtime environment, any objects has been damaged, any WebSphere and QManager objects has been damaged in the runtime environment, we have an option to recreate. We have an option to recreate those options, recreate those objects. Any QManager objects has been damaged in the runtime environment, we have an option to recreate those objects if we are using linear logging. If we are using circular logging, If any objects has been damaged, queue manager objects has been damaged in the runtime environment, we are not able to recreate. If we have a backup, so we can restore it. Okay, so we have a specific one exercise for the linear login. So by default option is the circular login. If I want to create a queue manager in the linear logging option, while creation of the queue manager, we can mention -lr. So -c training, like the all these you can mention here. And this is the -lp is the primary logs, -ls is the secondary logs. -lp is the primary logs, -ls is the secondary logs. By default, -lp is the primary logs are 3, okay, secondary logs are 2. By default, primary logs are 3, secondary logs are 2. Okay, so up to any Unix machines means any Linux based or AX or Solaris. So we can manage, okay, primary as well as secondary up to 511. In Windows it is into the 255. Okay, so any Linux base, either it may be Ubuntu or CentOS or it is into the Solaris or AX, whatever it may be. So primary as well as secondary you can manage up to 511 in Linux base. In Windows it is into the 255. So primary log should be, we should have minimum 2, secondary log we should have minimum 1. Okay, so -lp represents, okay, primary logs, -ls represents secondary logs. Okay, by default we have 3 and we have primary logs, we have 2 secondary logs. Okay, the secondary log files are not visible. Whenever the primary logs are exhausted, the secondary log files are visible. Okay, so -ll, -lc circular logging, -ll linear logging. Okay, -c is the text description, -lp is the primary logs, and -ls is the secondary logs. And hyphen, and after that two more important, -ld and -md, -ld and -md. So -ld represents -ld represents directory to hold the log files for the queue manager. This -ld represents the directory to hold log files for the queue manager. So if you want, we can make it as a separate mount point also for this -ld as well as the -md. -md directory is used to hold data files for the queue manager. Means whenever I am creating a queue manager, for example Nagin, so in 7.5 version there are 77 objects will be created. In 7.1 onwards there are 77 objects will be created. Okay, so it means file system will be created, queue manager file system will be created. So that will be stored in the -md path. The log files for that queue manager will be stored in the -ld path. So -ld refers the log file location for the queue manager. -md refers the data files file system for that queue manager, it refers -ld and -ld. Okay, so -q is the default queue manager, -q is the default queue manager. Okay, so for one MQ server installation, we are able to create only one default queue manager. For one MQ server installation, we are able to create only one default queue manager. Okay, so for while start, so okay, so for example, okay, if I want to start the queue manager, strmqm is the queue manager command, and name of the queue manager we are given, right? So for default queue manager, while starting no need to give the queue manager name. Okay, No need to give the queue manager name. For example, if I create the two queue managers, Nagen and Nagen 1. Okay, if I create the two queue managers using hyphen q option. Okay, using hyphen q option. Okay, so on the same mission, same name, we are not able to create a two queue managers. Here I created a hyphen q using two queue managers. So hyphen q specifies the default queue manager. For one MQ server installation, we are able to create only one default queue manager. But here I created a two queue managers using hyphen q option. Both are created. Now we have a doubt here. Which one is the default queue manager? Nagen is the default queue manager or Nagen 1 is the default queue manager? Okay. Always, which one is the latest newly we created using hyphen q option? That is the default queue manager. Always, which one is the newly we created? That is the default queue manager. It means Nagen 1 is the default queue manager. Nagen 1 is the default queue manager. Okay. So hyphen q specifies the default queue manager. So remember, we are able to create only one default queue manager for a for one MQ server installation. So how to find out the default queue manager? We have a exercise. So hyphen SA start automatic option. Hyphen SA start automatic option. So this start automatic option is available for Windows, but it is not available in Windows. Okay, this hyphen SA start automatic option, this is available for only Windows environment. This is not available for the Linux environment. So if you want to use start automatic option in Linux, we have to go for the support pack. Okay, what is this start automatic option? While creation of the queue manager, if we are using hyphen SA option, start automatic option. For example, see here, if I display dspmq is the command, it will display what are the queue managers are resided in this mission and status of the queue manager. Few are running, few are not running, right? So this SGPR I am not started today, but it is running. Okay, but there are some four queue managers are running. There are two queue managers are showed here and at immediate state. I am not started all these four. Those are the running. I am not started. Okay. So for example, whenever we reboot the system, means whenever I restart my system, what will happen? Queue managers will be shut down. Means queue manager will be in at immediate state, or queue manager will be stopped in unexpected mode. Whenever I start my system, okay, if I created the queue manager using hyphen SA option, okay, so the queue manager will be started along with Windows service. Okay, if I am using hyphen SA option, it is start automatic option. This is only for Windows. It won't will be available in the Linux. So whenever I started my Windows mission, along with the Windows service, the queue manager will be started. Okay, so that is the hyphen XA. Hyphen SAX is the start automatic option for the multi-instance queue manager. There is a multi-instance queue manager concept for active and passive for failover purpose. There is a multi-instance queue manager concept has been included from version 7 onwards. So that is we are using for the hyphen SAX for multi-instance queue manager. And one more important is hyphen U. Okay, so hyphen U is the dead letter queue. Okay, so you can mention hyphen U dead letter queue. So name of the queue here I am mentioning. So hyphen U dead letter queue. So for every queue manager, so we have to assign one dead letter queue. Assigning a dead letter queue to the queue manager is also a best practice. Okay, we are able to assign only one dead letter queue to the queue manager. we are able to assign only one dead letter queue. We are able to assign only one dead letter queue to the queue manager. For example, if I want to change, for example, I am assigned the queue name as a DLQ. In going forward, I want to change DLQ1 as a dead letter queue. So we have an option to change, but only one dead letter queue we have to assign for the one queue manager. It is a very important to assign a dead letter queue. There are two ways. While creation of the queue manager also, we have an option to assign a dead letter queue. After creation of the queue manager also, if we forgot to assign a dead letter queue, if we forgot, we assign a dead letter queue to the queue manager. So after that also, we have an option to assign a dead letter queue to the queue manager. Okay, but assigning a dead letter queue to the queue manager is very important. We are able to assign only one dead letter queue. So if you want to change the dead letter queue, yes, we can change. Okay, so undelivered messages will be undelivered messages will be stored in the undelivered messages will be stored in the dead letter queue. Okay, so hyphen u is the specifies the dead letter queue. Okay, so these are the most important while creation of the queue manager. These are the most important options we have to remember. Hyphen LL, hyphen LC circular login, hyphen LL is the primary login, hyphen C is the text description, hyphen LP is the primary logs represents, hyphen LC is the secondary logs, hyphen L is the log file path for the queue manager, hyphen LD, hyphen MD is the data file path, data files for the queue manager file system location it will shows. IPN queue specifies the default queue manager. We are able to create only one default queue manager. IPN as a is a start automatic option. Remember this is only for available for Windows. -u specifies the dead letter queue. So queue manager name is Nagin here. Final this is the queue manager name. So this only this is hyphen if remaining all this syntax is it is common whether you are in Linux, AX or Solaris or Windows or iSeries or whatever it may be. This is
So
syntax.
Nagendra,
This is
so
syntax is
Nagendra,
common. Okay. Yeah.
so Nagendra, what was the option if we use a SA option in a Linux? Like mostly server is rebooted, and
It
do we
won't
need
take.
to?
This is not available. If you are using this is not available. That option is now not available in the Linux. It
So
won't start.
in a production environment, so once the server reboot, we have to manually bring up all the queue manager,
Yeah, you have to manually start the queue managers.
or
Okay.
either we have a cluster.
Whether it is into the cluster is a different topic. Whether the queue manager is clustered or whatever it may be. So we
Okay.
have to start manually the queue manager.
Right.
Okay.
Did we assign a dead queue line for a multiple queue manager?
So every queue manager we have one dead letter queue. Okay. So every queue manager is a different object. For every queue manager we have to assign one dead letter queue. Every queue manager we have to assign one dead letter queue. So
So
every
Nagendra, what is the dead letter queue?
yeah we have this is also now you want if I am explaining also now you won't get this one. Actually see here. So here we have this is also one we have specific exercise. This is very important. Dead letter Q is very important. We have one exercise. So here okay. So application is writing message in the queue, right? Okay. So while application is while what IBM is saying once application is successful, it is saying once and only delivery. Once and only delivery. This is called it as a okay assured message delivery. assured message delivery. So how much percentage IBM has given is 99.99%. Okay, while so what IBM is saying, once and only delivery, that is we are calling it as a assured message delivery. Once application successfully write the message in the queue, okay, so WebSphere MQ means queue manager responsibility to deliver the message. So queue is the storage place. If the target application is not available, if this target is not available, not an issue, because the queue is the storage place, we know. So the messages are lying in the queue. Whenever this is available, then this target application is reading. So by default, this queue can store 5000 messages. By default, this queue can store 5000 messages. So we have an option to increase this step. Increase. You can by default it can store 5000 messages. Okay. So we have an option to increase. Either it either it can okay, make it as a 10,000 or 15,000, 20,000. Okay, unfortunately we haven't increased, but application is keep on writing messages, but here there is no storage place is available. That time what queue manager will do is it will store those messages into the dead letter queue. Okay, after that as an administrator what we are doing is again we are forwarding these messages into the destination queue. Okay, so means undelivered messages. So any kind of issue, if the queue is not available or it is not able to put them okay, queue is full, so those that time queue manager will take responsibility. Why? Because queue manager responsibility is providing message in queuing. So queue manager will take those messages and it will write those messages in the dead letter queue. Okay, so that is the reason assigning a dead letter queue to the queue manager is very important. So every queue manager only one dead letter queue we have to assign. Okay, only you are able to assign one dead letter queue. If I want to change, we can change the queue, but we have to assign one dead letter queue. Okay, so this dead letter queue very important. We have one exercise for that. Okay, and linear login, by default it is taking circular login. The advantage is means any damage objects has been damaged, we have an option to recreate. This is also we have one uh, uh, one exercise. Okay, so while creation of the queue manager, so these are the options we have to remember. Okay, so crtmqm is the command. So -c, for example I am given the training, so -q. So -q specifies the default queue manager. How many default queue managers we are able to create for one MQ server installation? Only one default queue manager. Okay, so for example test is the my queue manager name. Okay, just press enter. Okay, so the queue manager has been created. The queue manager has been created. Okay, so now we have to start. Okay, so strmqm, if queue manager is created, it is not into the running state. strmqm and the queue manager name we have to give, right? So if you are given like this also it will start. For default queue manager, no need to give the queue manager name. If you are given the queue manager name also, it will start like this. Press enter, it will start normally as is. Okay, if you are not given also, press enter, so it will start. Okay, see here dspmq -m queue manager name test. But if I want to stop, what is the command? If I want to stop the queue manager, what is the command? End mqm. End mqm is the command to stop the queue manager. -I is the immediate option. So while ending, okay, we have to give the C here while ending. So I am not given the queue manager name. The queue manager name is either not valid or not known. It means, for example, see here the queue manager name is not either not valid or not known. So for default queue manager, while starting only, no need to give the queue manager name. But if I want to stop the queue manager, so I have to give the queue manager name. But we are able to create only one default queue manager. Okay, see here that again it has been started. So now what I am doing is crtmqm -q. I am created a one more queue manager using -test. Okay, sorry, -q option. So my queue manager name is test one. So this is also has been created. Okay, this is also has been created. So strmqm press enter. Okay, so it has been started. This is also started. So now we are having two queue managers, test and test. Both are in running, but we may have doubt which one is the default queue manager. So strmqm, okay, press enter. So which one is the started, that one we can easily identify default queue manager. But that option is not a good, right? Because we have these many queue managers, we have to stop all these queue managers and again strmqm and press enter. Which one is the started? That one is the identified as a default queue manager. So that is not a best option, right? Because we have to stop all these queue managers. Okay, so we have a command called it as a dsp mq, okay, -o all, okay, -o all. So here dsp mq-o all, what it shows, see here the qm name is test1. Okay, so status it is running, whether it is default queue manager yes or no. For test one it is showing yes, standby not permitted, and the installation name, installation path, and installed version it is showing, right? So DSPMQ-O all command, so it shows the queue manager name and the status, whether it is a default or not, standby instance or not, installation name, installation path, installation version. Okay, so here it is showing default queue manager S. For queue manager test, see here no, no. Remaining all the queue managers it is showing no, right? So how we are identifying the, so we created the two queue managers using -q option, -q option. So which one is the, which one is the, which one is the default queue manager? So we discussed always the latest we created, that is the default queue manager. Test one is the default queue manager. Okay, I want to check for only one queue manager, DSPMQ, okay, -o -o all -m queue manager name, okay, test. So this is all these options shows for the one particular queue manager. Okay, so DSPMQ-O, so all command it shows the, which we can easily identify which one is the default queue manager. Okay, we have one more option. Okay, we have one more option. Okay, so in the directory structure, in the directory structure, so this is the IBM WebSphere MQ. Okay, so in Linux environment, this is, this directory structure is into the, this where mqm, the file name call it as a mqs.ini. Okay, when it comes, when we are coming into the Linux environment, so the directory structure is the where mqm and the file name is the mqs.ini. Okay, so here, okay, mqs.ini is the WebSphere MQ machine-wide configuration file. WebSphere MQ machine-wide configuration file. Whatever we created the queue managers. If we create the queue managers, installation path and everything, queue manager entry will be written here, entered here. Okay, see here for default queue manager. Okay, for default queue manager, test1 and queue manager name and installation location and installation name it is mentioned, right? For test queue manager, it hasn't mentioned any default queue manager. Okay, so sometimes in IBM exams, okay, certifications they were asking. I have a 5 queue managers, okay, from queue manager A to queue manager D or E. I'm not using any -q option. If I want to make it as a default queue manager, what I have to do? So in mqs.ini file, so you have to add this default queue manager name equal to test. Then it will make it as a default queue manager. Okay. So we are able to create one default queue manager, right? We are able to create one default queue manager for the one MQ server installation. So how to find? We have two options. One is the -dsp mq-o all option, and another option is the mqs.ini file. We can find out the. So now see here, press enter. See here, now test one is started. Test won't be started, right? Because the test one is the latest we created. Okay, so these are the two options. There is a chance to ask how you are going to identify the default queue manager. So these are the two ways. One is the mqs.ini file, and another one is the dspmq-o all is the command to identify the default queue manager. Okay.
Nagendra, one question is there. So for example, I've got, let's say, 5 queue managers. They all are stopped at this moment, and I just give the start command. So will it still start only the latest queue manager, or it will start all?
It will start only latest queue manager, -q option.
Okay. Even if I have, no, not -q manager. What I'm saying is start command, where you created one test one, and you started, and it just started the latest one. So what if in a scenario I've got 5 queue managers, they all are stopped at this moment, but when I give the start command, will it start all 5, or it will still start only one, which is the default, the latest?
strmqm press enter means it only stop default queue manager. strmqm along with you have to give the queue manager name. Okay, along with queue manager name, then only it will start the queue manager. If you are given strmqm, then if you press enter, it will start only default queue manager.
Default. Okay.
It will start only, this is for only default queue manager.
Okay.
This is only for the default queue manager. It won't start all the queue manager, only default queue manager it start. Other queue managers it won't start.
Right. And do we have a particular location for the INI? Right. And do we have a particular location for INI file? I mean, is that, or we can keep it anywhere?
No, that will be created during the installation. Okay.
And the default location would be?
Default location would be, this is the, just now I write it here, right? So where mqm mqs.ini file in Linux. In Windows, this is the location. Program files x86, program files,
Okay.
WebSphere MQ. This is the location. This is the location. This is the location.
Just a question. If I change the MQSI change as a default manager, do we need to, it's reflect in the command line as simultaneously like a forward to on a command line as well?